Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Just wrapped up our championship weekend previews for the NFL. Coming back out with a little more football here, talking Bill Belichick and the head coaching carousel. We gave some updates on the head coaching hires up to that point. We talked about the Titans got their guy, Brian Callahan, from the Cincinnati Bengals. Since then, we have two more coaching hires, neither of which are Bill Belichick, especially relevant because the Atlanta Falcons, who was the only team that Belichick interviewed with, he did so twice. They decided to go in another direction with Raheem Morris. Quick note on Morris, he supposedly killed the interview process. He was described as electric when he was in the building. Morris was with the Falcons from 2015 to 2020, holding various assistant positions, then being promoted to defensive coordinator before eventually holding the interim head coaching job after his boss, head coach Dan Quinn, was fired in 2020. Afterwards, he went to the LA Rams organization where he won a Super Bowl, and reportedly he gained a lot of maturity. That experience was incredibly valuable for him as of course, coming in the playoffs and the nuances that come with that, but as a leader too, and working under Sean McVay, who is one of the most personable players, coaches in the NFL. So he returns to Atlanta and closes that door for Belichick. And then the Carolina Panthers hired Dave Canales, which I think is a home run hire myself. I was sort of put on to him early in this coaching cycle about just coming to understand how valuable he was for Geno Smith as the quarterback's coach in 2022, helped that resurgence, helped get the Seahawks back to the playoffs in a year where nobody had the Seahawks making the playoffs last year. Their projected wins was something like 4 or 5, and they go on to even have a competitive first half against the 49ers in the playoffs last year. So he did a really good job that year. He got an offensive coordinator role this past year, hired by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and yet again with another quarterback that was drafted in the first round that showed some talent but had sort of been written off, shout out Geno Smith, was Baker Mayfield and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And here they were again, not just making the playoffs, but winning a playoff game. Baker probably helped him settle into the team and likely to get another contract with the Buccaneers going forward, which, great for him, happy about that. But as far as Bill Belichick goes here, that means there are only 2 remaining head coaching vacancies. That is with the Seattle Seahawks and the Washington Commanders. Now, the Commanders have been heavily linked to Detroit's offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, which I also think would be a great hire. I've been a big fan of Ben Johnson. But Washington was really the team that I would have, if not for the Falcons, seen Bill Belichick going in with. A new owner in Washington. They obviously had a lot of skeletons in the closet, that franchise did, after Dan Snyder and all of the sort of bad culture stories that came out of that locker room. It was really a mess there for a while, and if you want to reestablish a culture, I think that Bill Belichick would be a perfect guy for that job. Again, new owner now looking to make a splash, but that is, again, it's not written in stone yet, but that the general consensus is that they're waiting for the Lions to finish up their playoff run to speak more thoroughly with Ben Johnson and potentially offer him the job there. The Seahawks They are currently in a wide open market as far as coaching goes. They've asked a handful of people to their second interviews. They're supposedly not in a rush to hire anybody, but Bill Belichick has not been included in any of these head coaching interviews. Not sure if Belichick would even want to go over to the West Coast like that. So it seems very likely that Belichick will not be a head coach or in the NFL at all come the 2024-25 season, which is pretty remarkable because you think about the all-time coach that he is. Any team that brings him in, especially when you're talking about a Commanders, a Falcons, a Panthers, these teams that really struggled last year, I think it's safe to say if he is your head coach, you are significantly better. I feel very confident saying that, yes, the Patriots season did not go well this year, but that's because Bill Belichick, the GM, did a very bad job of putting together the roster. The offense was atrocious, and for the Patriots, despite losing their two best defenders and rookie cornerback Christian Gonzalez and Matthew Judon, the defensive end, they were still a top unit in the league this year. But that GM conversation is likely what sort of did Belichick in come this head coaching cycle, because there was talk coming out of the Atlanta Falcons organization that Arthur Blank, the owner, was very for it, but a lot of people in the front office were against Belichick coming into the building, and that's because Belichick, he, as we've seen from his time in New England, he might have held GM responsibilities in Cleveland as well. He is a very hands-on guy, and he likes things his way the majority of the time. He's not a huge compromise guy, and I think that there's a level of people in that Atlanta Falcons organization didn't want to relinquish some of their power to bring in Belichick. So, if not this year, what is the possibility that Belichick could sit out a season and then eventually find his way back into the league next year? Well, to start that conversation, you have to look at what types of jobs would be available next year. I think that even before looking at next year, I'm just throwing this out there, and so was Adam Schefter at the time. He said, we're just having fun here, but he was on Get Up yesterday and talked about the possibility if the Chiefs were to win the Super Bowl this season, there are a lot of people that think that Andy Reid could be looking to retire somewhat soon. If the Chiefs were to win the Super Bowl this year, and if Andy Reid were to retire and go out on top, would Belichick come in and coach the Chiefs? I think that there's probably a good possibility of that, but I don't think that Andy Reid's actually going to retire, so I'm going to be on the record and say I don't think that that's happening, but sort of is a fun little hypothetical there. Imagine Belichick coaching Patrick Mahomes. I mean, that would be just unfair, really. But for as far as next season and what types of jobs could be available, I think that you have to start with the Dallas Cowboys, where before they decided to bring back Mike McCarthy, there was a lot of rumors going on between would Belichick be going to the Cowboys. I still don't think it's a perfect fit because you're talking about a very hands-on head coach in Bill Belichick and a very hands-on owner in Jerry Jones. So maybe a little bit of conflict there, but it's definitely possible. I think that the Buffalo Bills, they are another team that they decided to bring back their head coach this season, Sean McDermott. McDermott, I think deservingly so, is coming back for next season, but you're going to have to start to look at what is, and I think that McDermott's a very good coach, but what is the ceiling with him as the head coach? They've had plenty of chances these past few years with Josh Allen, and this is with a Josh Allen that has been on a rookie contract. It's only going to get more expensive from here. They're not in a great cap situation as a team, as a whole. So they could have a disappointing year next year. I mean, this year could have been very different. They almost didn't make the playoffs after starting 6-6 and a bad loss to Philadelphia in overtime. They almost didn't even make the playoffs this year, but they did go on a run down the stretch of the year, which almost for that alone, yes, you can get on McDermott's case about the slow start, but I mean, Josh Allen practically threw that game away week 1 against the Jets, and it just never looked great there as a whole. Obviously, all the injuries on defense, so I think that it's deserved that he'll be back next year. But what happens if they fall short again? Joe Burrow will likely be back in the mix for them. We're seeing the Ravens here ascending with a healthy Lamar Jackson. So I think that he could potentially be on the hot seat. Nick Sirianni's another one. Again, I think it was right for them to bring him back. But after the collapse from going from 10-1 to not even showing up to a playoff game, yes, a lot of turnover as far as coordinators, losing both of them last year. He's now fired both of the coordinators this year and going to be starting fresh again come next season. So a lot of turnover. I think that the players really like him, but that's another one where people were calling for his name after their playoff loss this year. That would be a pretty good roster for Bill Belichick. I feel like a lot of talent on defense, but a little underwhelming as far as their linebackers group and older cornerbacks group. I think that they have so much talent on offense, and Belichick would be the perfect perfect coach, I should say, to raise up that defense and make them scary. Last two teams I'm going to throw out before the break here are the Chicago Bears and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Bill Belichick is a nerd for football. He loves the history of the game. And I think that when you're looking at franchises like the Steelers and the Bears, there's so much history there. I think he would love the idea of trying to break the all-time wins record in either of those historic spots. Almost stick it to Robert Kraft a little bit. And I think that there's a chance that either of those jobs could become available last year. Tomlin's going into the last year of his contract. I don't think he gets enough credit for helping this Steelers team that, they had quarterback injuries, and even when Kenny Pickett was healthy, he wasn't great. Tons of issues with Matt Canada, their offensive coordinator. They had to fire him during the course of the season. And I think that he is going into this last year. There's a question of whether or not he's going to want to stick around there as well. I think that there have been a little bit of flashes that he's maybe losing the locker room a little bit, but I do still think that he doesn't get enough credit for winning as much as they have. Not that they've won anything in particular, but keeping them as competitive as they have been, at least with maybe middling rosters. And then as far as the Bears go, Matt Eberflus is fine. Their head coach, I don't think he's proven anything really. They had a nice turnaround to end the season, but they are probably going to be drafting Caleb Williams this year. And if this upcoming season doesn't go well for them, I could very easily see them trying to sort of establish themselves more as a win-now team, because they showed that they have promise. Despite some of the bad moves that their front office has made, they should be getting a generational talent at quarterback. They have the number one receiver. They have their own pick that they can use to probably go and get another weapon for your young quarterback. So I think that both of the Chicago and Pittsburgh jobs could potentially open up. And again, I think that Belichick, the idea of breaking history with either of those historic teams would really resonate with him. So that is all on the coaching front for now. We're going to be taking one last final break, and on the other side, we're going to be talking about the Golden State Warriors this dynasty of the 2010s into the 2020s, but they are really struggling. So we're going to be talking about whether or not they are past the point of contention on the other side of the break. Stick with us.